drought story, we're now joined by Water and Sanitation Department spokesperson, Mr. Sputnik Ratau, who's in our Pretoria studios. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome. We've seen some rainfall in some parts of the country, previously declared disaster areas, places like KwaZulu-Natal, the Free State. But just give us a summary of the situation. Is it just a little bit of rain and certainly not enough? Where are we?
Yes, Peter, it's correct to say it's a little bit of rain and definitely nowhere near enough. We've got to remember that over the last 2 seasons, we have had very little, if any, rain that we can talk about, and therefore our land generally has become quite dry, such that the little bit of rain hasn't quite sunk into the ground so that we can be able to capture. We haven't had a lot of runoff that we can then use in our dams and reservoirs and so on. So in effect, when we look at the last 2 seasons up to now, we are still in a worse off situation than the last 2 seasons. And basically, we've continued to lose at least about 1% of our normal water levels per week over the last couple of months, basically.
All right, so I'm going to get into our cities just now, but I just want to start in our rural areas because agriculture is an important part of our economy. And one hears stories about struggles there. Is crops and livestock seem to be seriously threatened by what's going on?
Yes, we do have those threats to our livestock and crops. And when you talk about crops, you must remember that essentially when you look at places like the Free State, which is where most of our maize is actually grown, and where we are today, that we have not been able to actually have anything that we could talk about in terms of planting. Therefore, it implies that we will have less to be able to get out of the ground in the new year. That is the one part. And when you look at what the Department of Agriculture as well as the provincial governments have been saying and encouraging most of our farmers to do, is to look at how they can be able to reduce the amount of livestock that they have so that the catastrophe doesn't become even bigger. And therefore, that is because we've got to look at how much water can we actually use to be able to support that kind of those kinds of numbers of livestock that we have, and the kind of and the amount of agricultural crop that we can be able to have in this time.
Now, over the years, more and more people are moving into the cities, and that's been putting a lot of stress and strain on our infrastructure. And it's starting to really take hold now. I mean, we've seen Cape Town as the latest metro to institute level 2 water restrictions. Is this something that we're going to have to get used to, certainly in the short term?
Certainly in the short term, because when you look at it, it doesn't start with Cape Town as such. We can remember that the other metros, particularly Mangaung and eThekwini, have already, over the last year, also had water restrictions in their areas. But it's something that we need to look at and say, what is it that we are trying to achieve with the water restrictions? Because we need to understand that even as the intro correctly put it, this is not meant to be a punitive measure against consumers, but it is supposed to be a means to assist the country to be able to use less of the little that we have so that it can last us over a longer time. And if you remember that in this past winter, the Western Cape received much less rain than it normally receives. That is why right now even their dam levels are at the place where they are. And it is critical that the province is able to save at least about 20% of their water consumption in this period, so that in their next rainfall season, it doesn't find them worse off than what they are today. And therefore, that must be the thinking behind all of us so far as the issue of water restrictions is concerned. It is also important that all of us support those water restrictions, because even if the municipalities or the metros, set up those water restrictions, but people just go on and say, well, I can be able to pay the fine, it doesn't help because it will obviously reduce the amount of water that is available for all of us.
Is the message sinking in, though? I mean, I think it took a while to convince people to start saving electricity and switching things off. Are we starting to get the message as consumers to save water in the same way?
We would like to believe that water being an even more critical resource than electricity, when you look at whether you can be able to make do without water or without electricity. We believe that, water can hit you much more quickly. Not just in your pocket, but as well in your upkeep, whether you are able to cook, whether you are able to wash, whether you are able to do so many other things, because water is a cross-cutting resource. And therefore, we think it has taken people a shorter period to understand that if we do not look at water as a critical resource, we will really get ourselves into trouble. But as a department, and especially as a sector, we take the issue of messaging quite seriously. That is why we believe that we need to hold hands, not just government, not just the sector, but everybody. That is why some of the efforts that we have put into place has brought in some of our big water users in industry, in agriculture, so that we can be able to say we understand where the issue of water is, and therefore we need to be able to have a common messaging that goes out to all of us as a country.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Let's hope that message is heard loud and clear. Thank you very much for your time this evening. The spokesperson at the Department of Water and Sanitation, Mr. Sputnik Ratau, speaking to me from Pretoria.